All right, hello, good morning, welcome everyone. I am super excited that one of the very last things I get to do as SOA president is to welcome you to day 2 of our annual conference. And I'm glad that so many of you were able to make the trek up to the northwest part of our state this year for a different experience. As someone that resides in this area, it's fantastic that you're able to come up here and see a little bit of what we have in this part of the state. And thank you to our EPC committee for organizing everything and finding a great site for it. As I mentioned yesterday, I am so proud that despite the small size of our organization, that we are once again offering a hybrid conference this year so that we can meet our members wherever they may be and our attendees who aren't members. I know we have really high virtual numbers this year as well, so that is fantastic to see. And while doing so, still being able to maintain a low cost, that is something that we really strive for as an organization. So I am super excited about that. And again, similar to yesterday, I'm just really glad that for today's slate of sessions, we have a set of professionally diverse speakers, and they're going to touch on a number of topics related to archival sustainability. We'll have multiple sessions discussing different aspects of grants, including planning, writing, selection, and administration. And these sessions will include perspectives from different organizational types, as well as private and public grant programs. Outside of grants, we'll have multiple speakers discuss the topics related to donor relations and collaborating with other offices or individuals at your organizations. And finally, we're going to conclude our day with a crucial conversation session that will focus on archival work and advocacy in response to current events. And of course, we also have the other parts of our conference that we cherish. So, our silent auction, which helps fund our scholarship program. So definitely check that out when you get a chance. There'll be food throughout the day. And during our annual business meeting, we will be voting on an amendment to the Constitution, which is detailed inside the program. And we can talk about that more then. Again, similar to yesterday, I'd also like to take time to thank some of the people who have made this conference possible. I don't have the time to thank everyone individually, but I do want to thank the EPC committee, who works both as a programming committee and a local arrangements committee. They've done a fantastic job. And once again, Michelle and Sarah have just done amazing work leading that. I'd also like to thank our marketing and communications committee, who has done a great job, again, advertising the conference through different channels, really encouraging attendance and helping in that way. And then, of course, I have to thank Ohio History Connection and Betsy Hedler for all of the work that they do and all the support they give SOA. We legit could not do the conferences the way we do them without their support. And they support several other cultural heritage organizations across the state. So we're really thankful for all that they do. I should also thank our different sponsors that we have. So for conference sponsors this year, I'd like to thank Scene Savers. And they have a informational table outside for anyone who'd like to talk to them. I should say we've done a couple of donor-driven projects with them lately, or in the past few months, and they've just been a fantastic group to work with. And we've been extremely happy with the recovery work they've been able to do from some obsolete media that's been in really rough shape. So they do fantastic work. I also like to thank Archival Methods and Hollinger Metal Edge, both great companies that help give us the supplies that we need, and OhioNet. And then our scholarship sponsors this year, OhioNet, once again, so thank you for your generosity, OhioNet, the Ohio Preservation Council, and Preserve It. So, yeah, thank you, everyone. If we could maybe just do a super quick round of applause for everyone who's made this conference possible. All right, and then with that, I'll just give a quick introduction to our morning keynote speaker. I am privileged to welcome Patricia Hswe as our morning speaker. Patricia is currently the program director for public knowledge at the Mellon Foundation. As the foundation's programs area that supports libraries and archives, public knowledge makes grants that strive to increase equitable access to and activation of recorded knowledge that helps to build an informed and civically engaged society. Patricia has previously worked in the libraries at Penn State University, where she co-founded the Department of Publishing and Curation Services. and at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where she was the program manager for a set of grant initiatives funded by the Library of Congress and IMLS. Patricia holds her PhD from Yale University and is just an amazing person. I could read more and more of her credentials, but what I'd rather use this time to say real quick is I also was very lucky to get to know Patricia while both of us were at Penn State. And those times that I was brave enough to venture out of the Special Collections Library, she was one of my favorite people to run into on the entire campus. She's just an amazingly thoughtful, kind, and supportive person. And that's probably why she's in the role that she is in now. And just, I think every time I talk to her, I learned something or was forced to think about something in a new way, which are both good things. So with that, let me turn over the virtual floor to Patricia.
Oh my gosh. Well, good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. Matt, that was an incredible introduction. Thank you so much. I really treasure our time working as colleagues at Penn State University Libraries. I am so pleased to be with everybody this morning on the second day of the conference, otherwise known this year as Show Me the Money. I believe that's why I've been asked to speak this morning as part of that theme. I trust everyone's been having a solid conference so far, what with having a first day of funding conversations related to grant opportunities in Ohio and a grant writing workshop, among other things. Before I launch this presentation in earnest, I do want to thank a few people for this opportunity. First, there is Matt Francis, the president of SOA, whom I've known since our Penn State University Library days. I so appreciate Matt reaching out several months ago to inquire about the possibility of my being a keynote speaker. I also thank Michelle Sweetser of Bowling Green State University and Sarah Moosh of the University of Toledo. Many thanks to these three for inviting me to talk with you all this morning. I also have to say I appreciate being able to have the flexibility to deliver this keynote in live stream format from the comfort of my home study corner that you can see right here behind me. I have titled this presentation Archives, Access, and Knowledge to allude not only to the relationality among these concepts, but also to call out the value proposition of archives, the value proposition of access, and the value proposition of knowledge. Together, for me, and I hope for others, they make a powerful, interdependent triumvirate, an argument for why we care about the past, ensuring that others have the connection they want to the past for learning, interpretation, and insight. And I'll be harking back to the notion of value in this talk later in the presentation. So let's proceed to the outline of what I'll be covering. And let's see if I can advance the slide. There we go. Okay. In talking about public knowledge support for archives, I will provide some contextual considerations about Mellon and the Public Knowledge Program. I'll step through some grants that we have made in support of archives. Then I'll pivot to this question, which I realize can ruffle a few feathers. I will ask, so what? What does archives work funnel up to? Why do we do it? Who's it benefiting? And I realize that I'm sort of preaching to the choir here because you all know the value of what you do. What I think can be sometimes a disconnect is communicating that value of what you do. Given that the theme of the conference is Show Me the Money, I will highlight a few examples of grant-funded efforts that have moved to sustainable states or that are helping organizations achieve financial stability. And finally, I have a few closing thoughts, really questions for your consideration. I doubt they're novel, but I do believe they're worth asking as we all look ahead to determine how we best support each other, support the archives profession, and support archives themselves at this time. I'll note that I don't have information in these slides about our process for proposal development, but I expect that folks can ask that question in the Q&A. This is not to hide anything. In fact, you can find this information at the Mellon website, but rather to focus on what Mellon is funding and why. Yeah, I think I'm having problems with using just my arrow. Okay, the Mellon Foundation is the largest private funder for the arts and the humanities, and we have 5 program areas at the foundation through which we make grants. Arts and Culture, which supports visual culture, performing arts, and literary arts. We have Higher Learning, which focuses on aspects like curriculum innovation, broadened access to education, such as via the higher education program for the incarcerated. We also have Humanities in Place, which acknowledges the importance of place and cultural memory in the history of the United States and its territories. And then there's Public Knowledge, the program I direct, in which we support the stewardship of the multivocal cultural record as it's preserved and made discoverable and accessible via libraries and archives. Presidential Initiatives funds in 3 main areas: Puerto Rican arts and culture, the Monuments Project, and the Imagining Freedom Initiative, which is focused on arts and humanities organizations supporting those who have been impacted by incarceration. And we do this work because we believe that the arts and humanities are where we express our complex humanity. And we believe that everyone deserves the beauty, transcendence, and freedom to be found there. A key initiative that reflects beauty, transcendence, and freedom is Mellon's Jazz Legacies, through which our arts and culture program is helping to ensure that jazz elders are able to be supported, that the archives that they leave behind may be stewarded with care and be accessed by future generations. At Mellon, we also do our best to be responsive at challenging cultural moments, especially if reaching a certain scale is achievable. The most recent example of such an effort is the $15 million grant to the Federation of States Humanities Councils, which is ensuring that humanities councils across the U.S. and U.S. territories have the funds they need for the remainder of 2025. Complex humanity, beauty, transcendence, freedom, these are hallmarks of the arts and humanities. I'd argue that archives and archives work also resonate with these hallmarks. For the next several slides, I'll show what our wide-ranging support for archives has been and how. How this support has focused on primary source materials. And here's one of the great things for me about being at a conference full of archivists. I don't have to explain to you what primary sources or original source materials are. This is something that I do have to explain to folks like our Board of Trustees, for example, who come from very different worlds and not necessarily libraries and archives. It may interest this group to know that almost 1 in 10 grants that Mellon makes involves archives in some manner. This data point also shows the primacy of primary sources. And now let me take you through the ways in which we've served this primacy. For about a decade now, we've been supporting the Council on Library and Information Resources, also known as CLEAR, to conduct a digitization regranting program to which cultural organizations in the US and Canada can apply to receive funding to digitize their holdings. As I think we all know, digitization support is rarely as extensive in libraries and archives as it needs to be, which compels many of these organizations to seek external funding. Through the current iteration of DHC, we're seeing a wider range of organization types than in previous years receiving support, which is typically in the range of $60,000 to $350,000, to reformat their holdings, to increase access to them, as you can tell here in this scrolling list, on which I'll pause. Through Public Knowledge, Mellon is also supporting work at WGBH Educational Foundation to preserve public media through its American Archive of Public Broadcasting. As I'm sure many of you know, audiovisual cultural heritage has basically become endangered content because of the ephemerality and fragility of many of the AV formats that this content resides in, and because of the decreasing availability of the hardware needed to play these materials. Our grant to WGBH, which is in collaboration with the Library of Congress, is helping to ensure that we make steady progress on saving these materials as the window for preservation grows smaller. I just had to give a shout out to WYSO in Yellow Springs, Ohio, which has a Mellon grant to preserve the audio holdings of HBCU radio stations. Thank you to Jocelyn Robinson, who I believe is in the audience, and her team for carrying out this important effort. In talking about preservation, we can't skip the topic of use, since it's the continuing demonstration of use that helps ensure that archives will be preserved. Preservation begets access, and access begets preservation. This interdependence is akin to a virtuous circle. In public knowledge, we continually ask about use, users, demand, outreach, community building, all in connection with collections and archives, as well as with technology development related to them. The tool AV Annotate enables users like researchers, teachers, and archivists to be able to do things with AV holdings, such as annotate audio and video and create digital exhibits and digital editions of AV collections that have the chance to be shared broadly and to be known broadly. As this group likely knows, preservation of non-print and non-book materials can be tricky, if not at times intractable. For this reason, we've long been promoting web archiving as a vital cultural heritage practice through actual web archiving projects, through trainings, and through guidance that shows how to use web archives. We have a grant to the Internet Archive, for example, soon to wrap up, that is training librarians at public libraries in all 50 states. This is our Community Webs grant. The U.S. territories are also getting this support. It's also providing a subsidized subscription to Archivist, a web harvesting tool that I'm sure is familiar to this crowd. Our program has a history of supporting post-custodial archiving, as you can see listed on this slide. And these are grants that concluded recently and that are to higher education institutions, but in some way have engaged community-based archives. After some time, though, we got some pushback from community-based archives that had been partners with higher education institutions and had not been treated equitably. We then engaged Michelle Caswell, a professor of archival studies at UCLA, as an advisor to public knowledge to help us better understand the needs of these archives. And I have to point out that this is the kind of moment where you're really forced to hold up a mirror to what you do as a program and question how you're doing it, why you're doing it, and for whose benefit. So, as a result of that reflection, in 2019, a dedicated program for community-based archives was born. We ran this program through an open call for proposals from 2019 to 2021, and we funded 46 organizations as a result of those open calls. We resumed it earlier this year and are currently reviewing the submissions. Whereas in 2019, our first year, we had all of 250 plus submissions, and we thought that was amazing. This year, we received nearly 630 submissions. I think there are some interesting takeaways from all this, but it's clear to us that we've become recognized as a major funder for these archives. Our support of these archives continues in some different ways, such as by funding, yes, higher education institutions that are already doing close community work and thus have a good understanding of what goes into building trust, showing empathy and commitment, and being transparent as partners. You can see a couple of these efforts, one at the University of California at Irvine, which is integrating the work of community-based organizations in teaching and research involving faculty and students. And we have a group called Faculty Organizing for Community Archives Support. These faculty teach archives courses at information schools, and the institutions have received Mellon funds to support MLIS students to work in community-based archives. So at the same time that these students are getting instruction that is teaching them about community-based archives, they're also able to get firsthand experience working in such an archive. Among the priorities that we have for community-based archives is a research project to help us understand the extent of the universe of them and their needs, and an intent for field building around these archives to strengthen people's understanding of what they are about, why they are critical for a broader understanding of our cultural heritage, and how they may be best understood in terms of sustainability and stewardship. In addition to community archives, we have also begun to address the impact of climate change on archives. Oops, sorry, there we go. In 2023 to 2024, the Mellon Foundation engaged Cincinnati, Ohio's very own Era Tanzi to do a study on the effects of the changing environment on archives, focusing in particular on people, infrastructure, and collections. These findings are amazing, and they're very interesting, and you can find Era's reports on these topics at her website, Memory Rising. Her findings will likely inform our grant making in this area for the next few years, and I'm very grateful. We're all very grateful in our program to Era for doing this work. Finally, oops, sorry again. I wanted to point to a resource that we began funding and concluded support for some time ago, and that's the Social Networks and Archival Context, or SNAC. You may wonder, what is this? It was developed at the University of Virginia, and SNAC identifies people, places, and organizations from a wide variety of online archival resources, aggregating them in this one place, the site called SNAC. And these archival, online archival resources are library catalog records, full text databases, and finding aids, to name a few. In the last couple of years, Indigenous communities have found the resource as a helpful way to aggregate cultural heritage information pertaining to their histories, and have been adapting SNAC for this purpose, which is a really interesting example of something that was not necessarily created for a certain community or a discrete community, but that discrete community has found this resource and has worked to extend it for their purposes. I've now come to that point in the presentation where I pose the so what question. In hearing pitches for grant ideas, in reading concept notes for grant ideas, and in reviewing proposals for them, we do ask the so what question. And not only because we need to feel confident that we would be funding an effort that's satisfying a critical need in libraries or archives, but we are also expected to convey that need in clear and compelling ways for our leadership, including the Board of Trustees. So, some considerations here. What does a community, culture, or place lose in not archiving certain materials or documenting certain events and histories? What would be the impact of this loss, or the impact of doing nothing? What is the value of archives and archiving? How do you describe that value so that it is immediately understood, in particular by people who are not archivists? Finally, who's using your archives and why? How well do you know the user base of your archives or special collections? Who are your users? What are their motivations in consulting your archives? How do you grow the user base? And how do you craft storytelling about use? In a conversation with us, or in a concept note or proposal, we'd be keen to get this kind of information in starting to understand the rationale behind your idea. So I call these stories sustainability-ish because they are examples of how you can do sustainability, but there may be other factors that are involved in extending that sustainability. So let's turn to examples of sustained resources, programs, and organizations. Many of you probably know what Archivespace is, a tool for managing and accessing archival information about your holdings. Archivespace is membership-driven, and it's overseen by Lyrasis, two factors that have shaped its ability to be a sustainable platform. Archivespace is an example of a resource that is user community-driven, which in turn helps it stay relevant and maintained. Tropy is a desktop client for archives research management, such as for organizing photographs or archives materials. It is overseen by Digital Scholar, a nonprofit that supports several different digital platforms, including Zotero, Omeka, PressForward, Sorcery, and in the near future, Mukatu, which is a DAMS that integrates Indigenous cultural heritage protocols for protected access. You may ask, why is this a sustainability path? Because Digital Scholar has created a revenue stream from hosting services and charging for additional storage. Because of the scale of its user base, Digital Scholar is able to pay for developers to upgrade these platforms in accordance with user needs. So there is that virtuous circle, again, of user demand driving platform development, which in turn helps make the platform sustainable. In the last few years, public knowledge has also been addressing the financial resilience of organizations, services, and resources that are critical for research, teaching, and learning that is digitally inflected, broadly speaking. And our partner in this initiative is Nonprofit Finance Fund, which has a long history of working with small cultural heritage nonprofits to build financial health and stability. And so our first cohort of grants began in 2021 and extended into 2022. And for the grants shown here, we engaged NFF to provide year-long financial technical guidance to a cohort of organizations relevant to digital scholarship. Each organization received guidance from NFF around value proposition development and financial storytelling to help leaders more effectively convey their financial choices to funders, to clients, and other key stakeholders. So what NFF consultants do is they coach the leaders of these organizations to quantify their capitalization needs and to customize a refined business model to help them grow and adapt in the context of field-wide change. As you can see, we have a mix of types of organizations, some of them higher education organizations, some of them consortia, such as HBCU Library Alliance and Hati Trust, and one is a community-based archive, South Asian American Archive, which is a post-custodial community-based archive, and then there's also Rhizome, which is an organization that stewards or guides in the preservation of digital art. And it has a hosted version of Web Recorder called Conifer. NFF prepared these organizations to propose grants to Mellon for change capital support, which is essentially the development of organizational capacity to shift your business model and build long-term resilience. This includes having the resources, for example, to grow a reserve fund, generate new revenue, and expand the audience or community for your programs, services, and expertise. We have a 2024 cohort. This one focused on financial resilience for community AB collecting and preservation organizations. This is another, interesting mix of different types of organizations, some of them that have been around for a while, like Appleshop, and others that are relatively new, like Invisible Histories and Mid-Atlantic Regional Moving Image Archive. Finally, the Community Archives Collaborative, or CAC, is a global peer support and resource sharing network for memory workers, educators, and activists working to honor long traditions of survival and liberation. I should note that this group formed in response to recommendations made in 2018 by a nonprofit organization called Shift Collective, and this was part of a grant that we made to Shift to explore how community-based archives might become sustainable. This effort, the Community Archives Collaborative, is still somewhat nascent, although it now has a governance structure in the form of a steering committee and will be hosting community programs and workshops this year. So I have some closing thoughts, and I tend to have this habit of speaking too fast, so I may have finished this presentation a little bit earlier than I thought I would. But I'll close with these. I'll end with these provocations and queries, and it would be great if they could be prompts for discussion. So what does future-proofing the profession look like? I think about this a lot because it involves evolving the profession, evolving roles, evolving uses of archives, but it also relates to the question of how we ensure that archives persist, that the field remains relevant, and that archives workers are in demand. On the topic of collaborations, partnerships, and resource sharing, I'm curious to know, what are you seeing movement? What kind of movement are you seeing in these ways? How do you build and manage sustainable partnerships? What's the special sauce that you can bottle and share with others? And finally, aspects of a public good at work. Increasingly, especially with the decimations of federal funding agencies that serve the arts and humanities and libraries and archives, it seems that certain public goods are being threatened. How do we promote more powerfully the need to keep, if not view, many of our archives as public goods? How do we frame archives, access, and knowledge for the good of the public, for the good of society and our cultural livelihoods? What is the storytelling needed? What's the data that's needed to drive it? What audience would be the so-called low-hanging fruit for such storytelling? And with that, I'm going to say thank you and open it up to questions and comments from the audience.
All right. Thank you, Patricia.
Can you just share?
There we go. All right. Thank you, Patricia. Sorry about that. So yeah, give everyone a second to think about questions, and we also will welcome questions through the chat for all of our virtual attendees. And just as we get questions, whether in the room or through the chat, I will restate them so that Patricia can hear them effectively. And I'll go ahead and just ask a question to get the ball rolling, because that's my privilege of being the person that's up here. So Patricia, you highlighted a lot of really amazing grant supported projects that MLN has funded over the last few years. And a number of them were related to amplifying and lifting up diverse and underdocumented voices, which is fantastic to see. I don't know if this is something you feel you can directly address today, but I think it's a question that a lot of cultural heritage workers have right now. Obviously, a lot of funding from other sources for that type of archival work is either being eliminated or becoming much more challenging to secure for a grant or for archives and other cultural heritage organizations. But that's still a really important and incomplete part of our work as we try to do work for the public good. So I'm wondering if you have any perspective you can offer on if that type of work will continue to be supported moving forward. And again, I know it's maybe something you can't fully address, but I feel like it's a question that just needs to be asked at least.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the question, Matt, because it is a really critical one in this moment. I don't know if anyone saw the recent announcement of NEH grants and that the list of grants, and it's a different kind of list now. And I I hope that, I think many of my colleagues and I hope that we can continue to, let's say, broaden our understanding of this country's history and its cultural heritage, and make sure that the story that we're telling is one that is accessible and that is able to encompass a wide variety, right, of cultural heritages, I'll say. So, I mentioned that we support the multivocal cultural record, the stewardship of it, access to it, the usage of it. And I think that, a huge way that we can continue to do that is through supporting archives that, may not be institutionally stewarded, but that are at these smaller organizations. That's one way that we can ensure that we have a multivocal cultural record, is if we do support these smaller organizations. I think I'll stop there and ask if there are any further, if there are follow-up questions.
Thank you, and I really appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any questions from the floor or online? Sasha.
I really appreciate how those closing questions talked about community building, right? I'm wondering if you have any tips, suggestions, or advice for how we can work as a collective, both as smaller organizations like SOA, but also regional and larger, how we can best kind of leverage our resources to be able to work as a collective and to do these great things.
Yeah, that's a great question, and hopefully I'll be able to restate that in an effective way. So we had an attendee who asked about, they really appreciated the closing thoughts that you had, especially on community building. And so they're wondering about how smaller organizations can come together, whether institutions or professional organizations at the local, state, or regional level, and work collectively together to be able to achieve their goals. And so just from a lot of the projects that you have funded in the past, do you have advice on for those seeking to do that maybe haven't done that before?
Yeah, I mean, collaboration, as often as we see it happen, if you can believe it, I don't think there's really actually very much literature on how it happens, especially in the cultural heritage sector, or even in the educational sector. So I think what tends to, and I am speaking from the experience of grantees, but if you recall, the Community Archives Collaborative, that started with a very small effort, a very, very minimal amount of funding, maybe 100,000, to 4 archives, and I can't recall which one was the lead. It could have been SADA, the South Asian American Archive, and the grant was from NHPRC. At a time when NHPRC was starting to, you might say, explore support for much smaller archives like community-based archives. That effort could not have happened with just one archive, and I realize you're asking about collaboration. It was a group of 4, but it did have leadership in SADA. And I think that's what has to be determined, is who is going to not only be in this collective, but who is going to be the responsible party of ensuring that it's driven, that it meets its, mileposts, or that it is able to convene regularly. That's one way to think about it. And then sometimes what I've seen, at least in the context of the Society of American Archivists, sometimes there's a group, a committee, or a working group in a professional association that is clearly focused on, for example, Indigenous cultural heritage or access to that cultural heritage. And they come together and figure out what are the most urgent needs, for our communities. And in this particular case that I'm thinking about, the need that this group determined would be a priority is actually archives training among tribal communities or in tribal communities where, because they are under-resourced, there isn't much of a chance to engage professional archivists or to ensure that tribal communities interested in archives work can get that kind of professional development. So we funded SAA to do a small experiment, a small pilot, a series of workshops, virtual and on-site, for tribal communities to get that professional development so that they have the basics to be able to take care of their archives. So those are two examples. They can happen in the context of a professional association or even maybe an existing consortium. And they can also happen via a very small grant where you just make the decision as a group, as a collective, to start small and to work, progressively bigger. So I hope that helps. But I know that collaboration is like so much of it also is like willpower and dedication of a very few that then is, it spreads like almost like a positive virus, you might say. It spreads because it is such good work, it's important work, and people are inspired to keep working together.
Awesome. I saw a lot of nodding heads for that one, so I definitely think it was a helpful answer.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions?
I'm going to try this online. I think everybody can hear me in the room and online. Do we have a comment from our colleague Stacy Cheney Blankenship, who thanks you, Patricia, for your information. And that she reviews student worker applications via written responses to a few prompts. She's noticed more proliferation of very targeted language in response to her questions, and perceives those as likely created with the help of AI.
Mm-hmm.
She has other ways to evaluate the students for factors
like genuineness and understanding.
So that being said, do you have an opinion on grants
Submissions that you
that include AI generated
content?
Do you find the clarity of language favorable addition? Do the skit view as less than an evaluation, or does the assessment vary by grant reviewer? Stacy observes that using AI to
refine applications
could help smaller shops who don't have institutional help for
grant writing,
but is not sure how clear it is or acceptable
it is to grant reviewers.
Well, you may have asked the $300,000 question of the day, Stacy, because we have discussed this at the foundation. And if you'll notice, we don't really have any guidance about it at the Mellon website. Now, that said, how would any of us that are reviewing proposals, and our review process is in-house, how would we be able to tell that it is AI generated? We don't have, we're not going to tell grantees, you can't use ChatGPT to compose your proposal. And I completely understand why a small organization would want to rely on using that tool. My guess is one would use that tool and then, massage as necessary, right? That content or what it has generated. So my response here is that we wouldn't necessarily be able to tell unless the grantee, were to share that with us. We would not, at least in my program, I don't want to speak for, colleagues in other programs, because we wouldn't be able to tell. It's not as if we would question, whether this proposal was generated by AI. I leave it up to the organization how they wish to do it, and I can probably guess that we've already gotten those and haven't been able to tell, or haven't, necessarily looked at the proposal from that stance. So I think that, that would be my answer is I think it is up to the organization. We don't have, the kind of policy where we're going to reject an application because it's been generated via ChatGPT or other AI tools. I don't think that we could necessarily tell. Having used it once to develop a leadership statement at the behest of an executive coach that I was being mentored by, I just, it was interesting to see that, yes, it does generate quite, content of substance. But what I found, it was missing my voice. It was missing my perspective, sort of, how would it know what my background or experience is in leadership, or in philanthropy? And that's what I had to kind of input, the specifics. So that's my own personal view of using it. But Stacy, I don't think that, we're not in the business of trying to police what is AI generated content and what is not. We leave it to the grantee, the prospective grantee, to make that decision, and we trust you to make the right decision.
All right, thank you. A very adult-like conclusion. I appreciate that in this day and age. All right, do we have other questions at this time? All right. Oh, yes.
What are some of the risks that they find on like?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So from your perspective, what are some of the more common mistakes or missteps that sometimes get included in grant applications, maybe especially from first-time appliers or individuals from smaller institutions that might have less resources to help with the process?
Yeah. We have tried to simplify our process. If you were proposing a grant to us, let's say 5 years ago even, or 6 years ago, it would not have been uncommon for us to receive 25 to 50-page proposals. That's not the era we're in anymore. We are in a much more streamlined era. We're very clear about what we ask for, and you can find our proposal guidelines on our website. Each program has their own set of guidelines, but honestly, there is commonality among all of the proposal guidelines. So some common pitfalls I would say is, we have this platform called Flux, through which we receive proposals and we also give feedback. It has a documents section where we can upload Word documents and PDFs, and that's how we exchange the content of the proposal. But Flux also has various fields, and so our guidelines address those. And a common pitfall is not responding completely, to those prompts. And I can understand it, especially if the organization hasn't really come to terms about something like who's going to have access to this, how will access be managed, for example, what's the license level if you're using Creative Commons, which is something that we're very familiar with. And organizations may take a little while to really think that through. And so they may put something in that field and have to come back to it later, because then we ask, well, so you say that this is for everybody, but is it going to have a license level that, we can invoke in the grant agreement, for example? Another one is, maybe not being as detailed about an activity on the grant, or not justifying a budget allocation as neatly as we might expect. For example, if it's a salary for an individual, we do ask, how was that calculated? How would the subsequent years of that salary be calculated? And we do ask about benefits. And sometimes, it's it's math, and not all of us are good at it. I'm not, and so I can, miss a calculation. Or a grantee may miss a calculation, and so that's where we have multiple pairs of eyes looking at that section of the proposal. But I'll just, the main thing is taking time to read through the guidance, through the instructions, and making sure that all the prompts that are necessary, for the proposal are responded to. Oh, can I add one more thing? I want to emphasize that when we're working with you on a proposal, we will do everything that we can to ensure that we get a recommendation that will be successful, that will be approved by the officers of the foundation or the board of trustees, depending on which group of people read the recommendation. We will do everything in our power to make sure that that grant proposal is finalized.
Awesome, thank you. And do we have any other questions at this time? Chat or the floor? All right, and I'll ask one last question. Oh.
Sure.
Sorry, I saw something pop up in the chat, but it's something different. I'll ask one last question real quick, and it builds on a lot of the stuff that you've already talked about, Patricia, but maybe there's just a slightly different angle you want to take with this one. A lot of people that are involved with SOA are from smaller organizations, as you've probably picked up on, or ones with less resources. And again, because of the amazing opportunities that Mellon has been able to support and create, a lot of times we see large institutions, large consortial efforts doing amazing work. And so sometimes we might play the comparison game, even though that's the thief of joy, but we might play that comparison game and be like, oh, well, Mellon wouldn't be interested in, my smaller institution or my institution that doesn't have a national reputation. Do you have any advice for people that might a little bit have that mindset, and to help encourage them to maybe see if there's a good opportunity for them as well?
Yeah, one of the challenges of working for a private philanthropy like Mellon is we don't have this convention of doing open calls for everything. So I understand if, it feels like we're somehow a black box. But I do hope that folks, feel comfortable reaching out. My email is very simple, ph@mellon.org. And I'm happy to, have a correspondence or a brief call with folks who have ideas. One thing that in response to your question, Matt, one thing that we do recommend, especially if we are working with, let's say, a small organization that, like you say, doesn't have a national imprint or presence, in that case, we might ask, well, we might say your idea sounds really interesting, sounds like something that we might want to fund. How could it work as a model for other similarly sized organizations that are addressing similar challenges that yours is, and that could be a model that could be adopted, sets of workflows or, what have you, a technology that, could be replicated. Maybe it's not a technology, maybe it's a set of workflows, but that would be a key question so that we can make the case to our foundation officers and our board of trustees to say, yes, this is let's say a planning grant. It's at a small organization in Ohio, but their idea could be bigger if it were a model for other organizations to adopt. So that's one thing. How does it benefit the community of organizations that are similar to yours? And what would it take to be able to demonstrate that benefit, is how we would look upon that. Another thing to consider is, could this lead to something bigger that would then have national impact? not necessarily because, it's a model, but because it's a need that other kinds of organizations, small or large, might have. So we try to, in some ways, I wouldn't say that we're, huge risk takers, but sometimes we do, I would say, gamble on a small scale to see how might this work out? And we try to also to be transparent that if it's a small grant, and our planning grants tend to range from like 35 to 100,000, but if it's a small grant, we do say to folks, this could lead to something like a pilot implementation. We'll just see. And if it doesn't, what it means is you will have done something that's maybe a hypothetical, and achieved an answer or findings that tell you whether to continue or not, or whether to pick up a thread that is in those findings that might lead to a slightly different effort. So I highly recommend doing small scale projects that can yield some concrete but fundamental understandings that will help you get to a next stage, or help you learn something that you didn't realize that could then turn into something else unexpected. I hope that wasn't too abstract.
No, I mean, I was going to ask the question. From my perspective, I thought it was a fascinating and helpful answer, so thank you. With that, we're close to the end of our session, so we could just thank Patricia one more time for her time this morning.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. Take care.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Bye.
All right, and for everyone that's still here virtually or in person, we have about a 15-minute break. And then we'll get back together at 10:45. In this room and on virtual will be Find the Grants and Endeavor to Write. And then in the Thompson room, which if you're here, since that one's not streamed, is to the left as you leave this room, we will have Sustaining the Collection, a Case for Funding Environmental Needs Through Persistence, Data, and Teamwork. And if you have any questions, feel free to find myself or Michelle or Sarah or just about anyone. We're all friendly people here.